Yes, Richard Thompson arrived, 2 days ago, straight here to the ground. First trip to Pakistan, though.
First trip.
Initial impressions?
Oh, just extraordinary. The level of hospitality is off the charts. The warmth of welcome. Beautiful part of the world, actually, in terms of just the temperature, everything about the city, Rawalpindi. Just overwhelming in the sense of after 17 years to be coming back here. Clearly, after the challenges of a year ago as well, and not coming out. Obviously the tension that created. It was really important that we came out here and we were out here in force. And obviously the challenges of day one, whether we could even field 11 players, I thought maybe you might get a chance.
I wish on that pitch.
On that pitch you could.
Historically, the relationships between the ECB and the PCB have not always been exactly straightforward. How are relationships at the moment?
Well, certainly on a personal level, my relationship with the board, and particularly Ramiz, couldn't be any better. We have an enormous amount of affection for the heritage here, and I know in the past there have been some challenges, but this is more about the future now, and I think the opportunity to work with Pakistan, the 70-20s, really set the foundations down and clearly help both sides going into the World Cup as well. I'm now coming back here for the Test series. I feel Pakistan is a country that we have to support in every way we possibly can.
So it's not going to be 17 years before we come back
Absolutely
again?
not. I sincerely hope not.
You've been in the job now, 4 months or so?
91 days.
91 days. So early days, obviously, but you've had a chance to get your feet under the table. Compared to what you were expecting to find at ECB, is the game in better shape or worse shape than you anticipated?
Well, winning the T20 World Cup was extraordinary, particularly on who wasn't playing. So I think having that success was a fantastic start, and I think my inheritance on the field, frankly, couldn't be any better. The brand of cricket we played last year, the way that you feel Test cricket by England is being redefined. And making it incredibly exciting. So I think the depth of our pathway at the moment, both in red and white ball cricket, is as strong as it's possibly been for a generation. So in that sense, and also coming into an Ashes year next year, we're the only country ever to have obviously been simultaneous holders of the 2 white ball World Cups. If we win the Ashes next year, we're probably going to be the best Test playing nation as well.
Those are all on-field good things, if you like. What about the off-field challenges? Generally in the country it's a very difficult time with inflation high and cost of living crisis high. How is that going to impact upon the game, do you think, over the next 12-24 months?
It's a good question. We don't actually know, but we're readying ourselves for it. What we can't allow to happen is counties, whether the national counties or first-class counties, find themselves in a financial crisis that they can't control or could have done very little about. Utility costs particularly. Cricket is a big consumer of utilities. They've gone through the roof.
Are there any counties close to going bust?
There's some counties that are having some challenge, and we're aware of that, but we work very closely with our counties to ensure that we will give them all the support we can. But the reality is that there are some big financial challenges there.
Can I talk about, let's look at ECB first of all, as an organisation. The board itself has been criticised in the last year or two for lacking a significant amount of cricket knowledge. Very able people with lots of areas of expertise, not necessarily within cricket. A, is that a fair criticism, and B, what are you doing about that, if so?
Well, did you say sorry there for one point?
No, the ECB board.
ECB. No, the reality, I think, is I'm asking more of the board now. I'm asking the board to become more visible, and that's going to be challenging for some board members, and some board members will probably step down at the AGM. So we're currently recruiting 5 new board positions, of which 3 of those board positions are cricket related. And I agree, we need some heavyweight cricket experience on the board. Although Andrew Strauss isn't on the board, he's at every board meeting contributing. But I think we need more than that. And I think that's fair to level that criticism, but it clearly hasn't played a part in the success or whatever of English cricket, because clearly we've made some very good decisions there. But I think the challenges of the last year, where there hasn't been a chair, prior to that we had a pandemic, in Watmore wasn't able to really get going, so we probably had 3 years of no real leadership. So I feel coming into the role, I am really trying to show some leadership, be more visible, lean into problems, not be afraid to make some difficult decisions, which clearly we've got to make. But it's a challenge. The county structures, the pressure of the high performance review, all of those things have created additional tension.
We'll get into some of those issues in a minute. And another criticism levelled at the ECB is that the headcount there is over 450, and on the books is a £55 million annual expenditure to run the game. Will you be looking to cut back at the centre?
We are looking at that, and we will be. I think that number sometimes gets overstated. I think it's nearly 360, but that's still a lot of people. But the sense is that we are a governing body that governs every aspect of the game, unlike any other governing body. And I suppose I've walked in being a critic of the ECB, but I've seen firsthand now that given the scale of some of the challenges, particularly around EDI, particularly around the issues that we're experiencing, the resources that we're having to put into that are quite profound. And so, there are parts of our headcount that have grown exponentially to ensure that we can cope. But we've got to look at every aspect. Every pound should be justified, and there won't be one part of the expenditure that isn't being explored at the moment. We're going, I'm hoping that we can reduce expenditure quite materially over the next 12 months, but even more so in the next 24 months. So, it's going to be challenging on the basis that inflation's running at 10%. As you know, our broadcast deal means 85% of our income now is fixed until 28, but our costs are increasing by 10% year on year. So, that unless we can find new expenditure or new income somewhere else, then that's a challenge.
Another critic of the ECB you brought in now as chief executive, a man you work with very closely at the Oval, Richard Gould. What are you hoping he will bring to the job?
I'd like to think we were constructive critics.
Some would say otherwise.
I know, I'd like to think that we weren't throwing stones for the sake of it. What we were doing was challenging the ECB, and I'm going to be challenging the ECB while I am chair as much as I was a stakeholder. So from that perspective, I'm happy to have uncomfortable conversations. But with Richard was the standout candidate from a pretty thorough process, and had with me at Surrey, we changed the culture. I think we did things the right way. We managed to produce a lot of England cricketers. We managed to win competitions, and we made a lot of money. And from that perspective, I think we know what the problems are, and hopefully we can go at them relatively quicker than people from outside the game could have done. And I felt probably we needed an insider rather than an outsider. We interviewed both to enable us to get momentum slightly faster.
You slightly tempered your criticisms of the 100 which you had prior to coming in as ECB chairman. Since taking the job, Richard was probably a more vehement critic of the competition than even you were before you arrived at ECB. Has he tempered his view as well?
Yeah, he has, because the last 2 years have proven us to be wrong on one area and probably right on another. I think the fact that what it's done for women's cricket has been extraordinary. The investment that Sky put into the 100 has been extraordinary. The reality of the schedule is the issue. And the reason that Richard and I had some challenges with it is that we recognise with 3 domestic competitions and an increased international schedule was already causing problems. Bringing a 4th in was only going to make that matter worse. And what I'm determined doesn't happen is we don't marginalise the blast. We don't want one competition to succeed at the expense of the other. We want them to coexist together. So that's challenging, and we will find a solution to that, however hard it is, and it clearly is a hard problem. We will do that, but we're only 2 years in. It feels like the 100's been around forever, actually, but we're only 2 years in, and to be judging it this early would be wrong. The next few years are going to really say whether it's going to land, and it has landed, but the signs are positive.
Mark Kleineman, the city editor of Sky News, recently broke a story saying Bridgepoint, the private equity firm, had offered $300 million to the ECB for a 75% stake. Is the story right?
We received an unsolicited offer. I'm not going to get drawn on what figure was offered, but we have received an unsolicited offer, and I'm sure we're going to. Based on that story, a number of people have now come forward that are showing interest, and private equity is awash in cricket. So I'm not surprised by this, given that at the moment sports rights have never been worth more than they are at the moment. So I would expect more interest.
What was your response to the unsolicited offer?
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you when we're ready.
But clearly you are open to the possibility down the line then, if not now, of private equity coming into the game. You've said that openly on the record before. What are the advantages, as you see it, of private investment, and what are the potential pitfalls, dangers and disadvantages?
Well, firstly, I would be very reluctant. I think the game needs to have a debate over this, because to sell a tournament, you're selling part of the English summer. And we are the only country that plays cricket in the Northern Hemisphere. That's really important not to forget that. So, if we were going to sell 4 or 5 weeks of the English summer, we've really got to be understanding the unintended consequences that could bring about. However, looking at co-ownership of teams and other elements, we'll explore that. But I mean, again, we're 2 years in. There's no possibility that after 2 years that tournament can be worth what it could really be worth in 3, 4 or 5 years' time. So, whatever we do, we're going to do it very carefully, strategically. We're not going to be opportunistic about this, which we could be. But I think that would be wrong, and I think we've got to look at private equity in its broadest sense. Where private equity is involved in tournament at team level, it can be involved in one and not the other. So, I've worked in private equity. I know how private equity operates, and I recognise at the moment that there's a lot of interest, and I don't believe that interest will go away.
You talked about some of the financial challenges that the counties have at the moment. You mentioned there that the unsolicited offer. Have you had any number of county chairmen come to you and say, "Come on, take the money, we need the money"?
A few. I'd expect that, but obviously they weren't fully aware of what the offer really entails. They weren't privileged, didn't have that information. So, sometimes headlines aren't what they always appear to be.
And the fundamental crux of the matter is cricket for public good against cricket for private good, I suppose. ECB fund pathways, women's cricket, disability cricket, all the things that national boards and counties have to do. Private equity presumably is looking for a profit above all, and there you've got to find some balance between the two.
Well, private equity in franchise cricket cannot just skim off the top. From a national governing body perspective in the counties, the player pathway is our significant asset. It's our principal asset, from the under-9s through to the academy. So we can't create that pathway, create those cricketers for the future, just for them to be picked off by a franchise or by private equity that don't have any of that overhead or any of that commitment to the broader game. So that has to be recognised, and that's what the game needs to understand as well. The pathway is our principal asset, and we have to protect that.
Where is the high performance review at the moment, other than in the long grass somewhere?
I mean, it's out there. I mean, ultimately 15 of the 17 references or the recommendations have been accepted. We all know the ones that have caused the most tension. That's still being debated by the counties to try and find a compromise. We've bought some time. 23 will play out the same way that 22 did. But ultimately you can't go into the 23 season not knowing what you're playing for in 24. So we still need to get to a point where that conclusion is drawn, and that debate's ongoing.
Can we talk about international cricket and some of the pressures around the international game? After England's fantastic World Cup win in Melbourne, the team played a 3-match ODI series against Australia. The result went against England, 3-0 to Australia, and at the end of it, the England captain said he wasn't fussed about the result. When you get an England captain saying you're not fussed about a whitewash against Australia, the suggestions are that there's overkill there. And I'm not criticising Jos Buttler at all, because everybody knows how difficult that was for England's team on the back of that World Cup, but it is a sign that there's too much international cricket, surely.
Well, I think we've had a glimpse into the future, in the sense that we now have a world tournament every year until 31. So the pressure on bilateral cricket now, which that was a case, where particularly when England play Australia, that's an event, that's a it doesn't matter what the format is. And for it to play out that way was a real concern for players, administrators, governing bodies to think, well, that can't play out. It needs more relevance. And to play 3 days after winning a World Cup as well, where the players really haven't even got their breath back, was very tough on them. And in the intensity of what you have to put into a World Cup, to then be expected to kind of raise your game again and play in that way, I felt for the players. But the reality is we now have to recognise bilateral cricket sitting alongside burgeoning franchise cricket and a World Cup every year. There's so much product out there, we need to find a way of recognising how we fit that in, because as much point we can talk about the UK, the English domestic structure, I'd say the international structure is even more challenging.
And is the fear that if ICC step back, which they won't, you've said there's going to be an event every year, but then you step back with your bilateral cricket, that just opens the door for more franchise tournaments, and players have quite clearly shown that given the opportunity they will jump at the chance to play cricket that pays their way?
If the game just chases money, the game will devour itself, and the game will pay a very big price for that. This is not just about money. Coming here is not about money. The slogan around the stadium, one game, one passion, sums it up perfectly for me. That what cricket can do, more probably than any sport, is to cross through geopolitics, is unite countries, and it can't just be about money. It cannot be about money. So we as the ECB need to stand up to that, because if we're going to be driven principally by a broadcaster putting a lot of money on the table to create another tournament, 15 franchise tournaments now, is going to be too much, and bilateral cricket will pay a price. We need to go and support Pakistan, Bangladesh, other countries. How are we going to do that? It works on reciprocity. If we go there, they come to us. How do we fix this in? Otherwise, you'll be effectively have 5 nations playing against each other, and the other nations will fall away. That will be wrong.
We've just seen a young English cricketer called Will Smeed effectively bin a first-class career before it's even started. He hasn't played a game, and he's kind of parked it to one side in order to fulfil his white ball aspirations, which of course those are the options available to cricketers now. But do you see any danger signs in that, taking that specific instance? Do you see any danger signs in a more general sense, and therefore the danger signs for first-class cricket in England?
Yeah, I do, and I think that's one of the points that may have been lost in the high performance review, because our schedule doesn't really encourage a player like Smeed to want to play in our domestic cricket, given the schedule is unworkable as we currently know, and that's the one thing we all agree, we have to fix the schedule, and it's not fixed yet. So as far as Smeed's concerned, I think that is on a dashboard, that's a flashing amber light. We can't let it go red, and what I mean by that is a whole slew of players suddenly make a decision that they would rather follow that path. It's not the Kerry Packer moment, but it's in that realm. And going back to the point I made earlier on the player pathway, this is a good case in point, that those players are coming through our pathway, one of the best pathways in world cricket, only to be lost to English cricket in a way we can't control. We have to be able to control that, and to be powerless, it can't be accepted. I can't accept that will just play out and we lose a generation of cricketers that should be playing for England.
Inevitably, a reasonably brief chat like this focuses in on some of the issues for the game and some of the problems ahead. But looking at the 12 months to come, I mean, it's a mouth-watering 12 months, isn't it? You've got a women's Ashes and a women's World Cup. You've got a men's Ashes and a men's World Cup. The next 12 months could really help to define the next few years of your chairmanship.
I think the next 6 months could as well, given what's coming off the field rather than just on the field. I mean, as you say, in terms of mouth-watering, I mean, the women's Ashes particularly, where we're playing in the big venues, ticket sales have been extraordinary. We've now increased the cohort of women playing to nearly 100 plus what play in the 100 as well. So, women's cricket, particularly as we've got the World Cup, T20 World Cup in England in 25, that's a real moment. We saw what happened in women's sport this year with the women's Euros. That was a seminal moment for the women's game. Cricket has to compete with that. We need to be winning that World Cup in 25, and the women's Ashes next year as well, probably played in front of the biggest crowds they've ever played in. I mean, the statistic in Australia, 86,000 people watched the women's final, only 80,000 watched the men's. So yeah, I think that balance between men and women's is now changing, and there's a huge opportunity for us to double down on that. But I think going into the next 12 months, on and off the field, throws up a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenge. And I'm very aware of all of that, and we've got to show some real leadership, be courageous, make some brave decisions, and get through this, but hopefully be able to celebrate some fantastic cricket.
Courageous enough to fancy a bowl on that pitch or not?
Rather not. I bet you'd like to bet on it though.
I would. Wardy, back to you.